No, we're going to do this right now. We're starting the episode right now.
Okay.
Everybody, pull out your phone. Yes. Listeners, you can do this too if you want to join.
I guess this is for my computer. I pulled up the Screen Time app.
Oh, I didn't even know that existed.
Perfect.
That's exciting.
Okay, so I've got mine up. Nick, are you ready? Who do we think is going to have the most? I think it is Nick. Nick is definitely going to have the most.
I'm definitely going to have you all beat.
You do? You think so?
Well, I use some apps where I leave my phone.
Yes.
My phone doesn't have auto lock, and I use some apps that are like timer apps or other things. Or like there's this really highly there's a new productivity app I use where the screen has to stay on. It's called TikTok, and you can't close the screen.
Right, otherwise you don't get the stuff. Yeah.
Otherwise, so I have a direct IV of dopamine into my brain, and that's how I get that. So that's the exception.
Great. Okay, so you're gonna win. I'll go ahead and go because I bet mine is probably lower. Mine is 3 hours and 17-minute daily average.
Okay, great. I feel much better.
Nothing. That's
nothing.
I
usually, Blake, I would have a higher amount than this, but currently my daily average is 3. It just went up. It was 318, now it's 319. But it's usually higher than that. So I don't know what happened there, but I do use apps that like run. If sometimes I'll listen to YouTube videos while I run actually, so that'll give you like an hour. Not to brag, I'm out there for an hour, but so that can impact it. Blake, what do you have?
I have, I think it's 4 hours and 14 minutes.
Okay, these are not as bad as they could be.
Yeah.
Let's not underestimate how long. Even we're like, oh, it's only 3 hours a day, and just think about, think about. If you're awake for 16 hours and 3 of those hours or 4 of those hours is your screen is on.
Listen, we need to have some more screen time because they need to be listening to our podcast.
Everybody listens to a podcast with the screen on.
I do.
What?
You just watch the progress bar, just stare at the static buttons of fast forward 15 seconds.
Okay, everyone's allowed like 20 to 30 minutes to focus on this on YouTube a week. So I give you that.
Okay.
Perfect. But it's still so much time. And I know that for a lot of people the number is higher. There have been weeks where it has been much higher for me. So it's no shame out there in the world, but I think that most people don't know their time or actively avoid knowing the time because it's a little horrifying. I mean, you think about it, 3 hours a day is how many hours a week? What? 21. It's almost a day of your week is spent with your screen on.
Well, and I think it's really interesting when you look into like your most used, like 2 hours of mine is on messages. I'm really popular. And
Must
it's
nice
not from
friends.
YouTube texting
nice
me,
brag.
that's for sure.
Nice brag.
No. Hey, I texted you several times yesterday.
Yes, Nick and we do text, so.
See? I'm doing it.
That's true.
Cool.
We're friends.
Sounds great, guys. I'll let you guys just finish the podcast here. I'll go back to my productivity apps. I'll go watch some podcasts on my podcast app. Just stare at some album art.
I am curious. We're talking about our phones today and technology and how it works with our productivity, either for the good or for the bad. So I'm curious, because neither of yours are like astronomically high. I've heard much higher, but do you feel like your phone is just like another appendage?
Yes, absolutely. And depending on the appendage, may be more valuable than some of the normal ones. I mean, could I live without my pinky on my left hand for a few days? Probably. But could I live without my phone for a few days? It's debatable.
It's at the point now that I basically own an Apple Watch just to find my phone. I'm like, when people ask about my Apple Watch, I'm like, I love it. I can find my phone so easy. I feel like that's kind of the sign that maybe, this thing has become an appendage. And it is an interesting thing to talk about.
Isn't that what an Apple Watch is? It's called you're literally just wearing a phone on your hand.
Yeah, you are, but you don't use it as a phone very often because it's not great as a phone or at text messaging or like a lot of other things. But you know what it's fantastic at? Pinging
Helping
your
you
phone.
find your other screens. Yeah.
So, find my other one. Yeah, I think, it's interesting to talk about how do we, we're talking about productivity, how we get the most out of our time. And I think this is a really important thing to talk about because it is an appendage. We are highly connected. And so how do we set boundaries well to help us get the most out of our phones?
That's right. So today we'll talk through 3 boundaries you can set to foster greater productivity.
Welcome to another episode of Focus on This, the most productive podcast on the internet, so you can banish distractions, get the right stuff done, and finally start loving Mondays. I'm Courtney Baker here with the dancing Blake Stratton. How are you?
Great.
Happy Monday. I'm so sorry. Verbs
happy
always
Monday.
Happy Monday.
Thank you.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday unto you. That makes our podcast sound a little cultish. It's like, oh, we have to, here's our great happy Monday, right? And then I say, and a happy Monday unto you, right? And we bow. We have the ceremonial bow. Yep.
Yes.
That's how it works here.
That's what we're going for.
So we're talking about technology and boundaries around technology. So you thought, hey, let's have Blake back on the podcast so he can tell us how much time he wastes on his phone. We can help him out. So this is very much the finger pointed at myself because I know I could use some help with this. Courtney, the first boundary of 3 that we'll talk about is time. Time. So we just talked about finding out first and foremost how much time you actually spend on your phone. If you're wondering if you should set a time boundary around your screen time, look at how much time you actually spend. Not how much time it feels like you spend, but how much time you actually spend. It's amazing what real data, how that will make you feel versus just your general feeling. At least when I looked at mine, I was like, whoa, hey, that's a lot of time. So how do we set a boundary around the time?
Well, one thing I think I learned this from one of you. I can't remember, but you can set time limits around individual apps. I had no idea that this was a thing. And I had found, there are some tools that, like I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of time on messaging and, certainly there could be some boundaries that I want to set on that. But usually it's the apps for me, like Instagram, where it's like, I'm not connecting with usually people here. I'm really just kind of filling time or, just zoning out for a while. And certainly there are moments where we all need that. It's not like that's a terrible thing, but it's just, I don't want that to get out of control. And so I think, I don't know who to give credit to. Somebody taught me this recently, and I set my Instagram time, it was Nick, to 15 minutes. And it's actually a really helpful tool because it comes up once you've hit 15 minutes. And 9 out of 10 times, I am like, how have I spent 15 minutes on Instagram? And there are certainly times where you can actually say, hey, give me 15 more minutes, or, today I'm going to be sitting at a doctor's office all day. And so, just don't worry about telling me the limit today. So there's certainly ways to make this boundary work for you, but it's been incredibly helpful and really a lot easier than I thought. It was just like having the awareness was like, oh yeah, like why don't I open my Kindle app and read a book instead? That's still screen time, but it's screen time that is more intentional. It's something that I want results from. So that's one way you can set a boundary is with these individual apps.
So I'll say that I first heard about someone doing this from, of course, none other than Mr. Productivity himself, Michael Hyatt. And he, back then, I don't remember what apps he was using it for, but he actually had set up a password around the additional time element, right? So you can add time or not. And then I think he may have told his wife, Gail, or somebody else, and he didn't know the password. And
Yeah.
so, if you're really trying to break the habit of how much time you're spending, there are ways to really force yourself. And Courtney, 15 minutes on Instagram, now that you know there's 15 minutes, don't you find that you're more like focused on Instagram? That's how I feel about Twitter. I have 10 minutes on Twitter
Yeah.
and I'm like in, out. I do the same thing with our 13-year-old. He has like an old iPhone of mine that he uses to message his friends and listen to Spotify. And I'm like, you're getting 10, 15 minutes a day of messaging, period. And so at first he was like, this is not enough time. And I go, you got to be more efficient with your time.
Were you like, I have a podcast for you to listen to?
Well, yes. And he's like, what's a podcast? And so it's really interesting how once you know that's there, and it's really, I've fallen into it where you get really used to sometimes clicking the 15 more minutes thing. So once that happens, you really need to start checking yourself and going, okay, is there really a problem here? Nothing wrong with these social media platforms, although I do think there's lots of problems with them. But a controlled space and a controlled amount of time is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want people to hear this is not like what you should do. I'm not saying you should only have 15 minutes on Instagram. It's what, thinking intentionally about, what the boundary you want to have, like what your personal goals are, vision for yourself, and trying to set these boundaries to help you realize that. And so that for me has been a really helpful tool.
Something else you could try is just setting a boundary around the time of day that you use your phone. So a simple one is, I don't want to use my phone at the dinner table, so I'll leave it in the other room. Or I'm not going to use my phone before 8 a.m. or after 7 p.m. or something like that. That's been helpful for me in terms of getting my mornings off to a good start, or getting the evenings, or just having better conversation at the dinner table. So that's a simple one you can start as well.
I have a hack for this, but is there actually a tool that does this on the phone?
Yes.
Really?
The screen time can also do this for you.
What I do is actually have sleep mode start much earlier than I'm actually going to sleep. Because sometimes it's just like the pinging or the obviously I spend a few minutes on texting. So that's not going off at a certain time, and it's earlier than, kind of like when I would start my evening ritual, so that I've got some time where I'm just not as distracted as I normally would be.
So building off of that time boundary, the second boundary you can set around your screen time, your technology, is space. Are there spaces where you want to be unplugged, where you want to intentionally set a device aside or not have screen time? So think about, maybe it's at the dinner table. You want to engage with your family. Let's just have no phones at the dinner table. Or when you're in the bedroom or in your car or at work, there could be different contexts, in other words, that are the boundary around your technology.
I think this is really helpful. I would also just add to those examples, because I find myself like even on a walk, like I would bring my phone and like check my phone. I know this isn't not a technology tool that I'm about to reference, and I've already given it a hard time on this podcast. But if you have an Apple Watch that has cellular, why that sounds so weird? Did that sound weird to y'all?
Cellular. Is that right?
Cellular. It's pronounced cellular.
Yeah. If you have a watch that has cellular, you can leave your phone at home. Again, this watch is not very good at doing many things. And so it's just like, can somebody contact you in an emergency? But it's like even those things like a walk, that I tend to like still bring my phone, still checking things. And so it's like that intention of like having a moment for myself that boundary gets blurred.
And let me just interject here. We spend a lot of time on our screens. We didn't really touch on, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter? Hey, you're going on a walk anyway. It's not like you're getting work done. Why not bring your phone with? And to me, I would just say there is so much value in boredom or in blankness of your mental headspace. So one of the spaces that probably most of us, unless I guess you have an Apple Watch, then maybe you could still do this. But I don't have any screens when I am taking a shower, and it's no coincidence. It even happened yesterday. I had like the best idea I've had in, a couple of weeks just when I was taking a shower. And it's no coincidence. And my mind is being occupied with the mundaneness of I'm not really thinking about anything, and there's no messages to check or notifications coming through. And that's why I take about 90-minute showers every day, so I can have plenty of non-screen time productivity.
But isn't it crazy that
productivity,
that's even like a space that we've introduced screens to? Like, it really is like an insane concept that we take for granted that, yeah, I can just have my phone in the shower if I want. Not a big deal. That's like insane to just accept as our reality. So I've done it. I'm not casting
I've never put
aspersions.
it to the test.
Oh, I've done it for sure.
I've never put it to the test. I don't trust the splash proof. I've ruined too many devices. I've had too many phones in rice in yesteryear.
I will admit that I have 100% taken my phone into the shower to listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
I just want
and to watch the podcast app.
Yeah, so she just stands in the shower, looks at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it's a really good podcast,
Scrubbing.
Yeah.
Plus, your phone can double as like a little sponge if you can't. You can just
exactly.
put some soap on there.
Of it.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess I took that for granted that we didn't bring our phones in the shower with that example. But my point is, space. Nick, you get this as a musician and as a teacher. Music is not notes. Music is notes and space. Mm-hmm. And productivity works that same way, where it's not just what you're doing, it's also the space that you leave for yourself. And so if all your day is filled with things, doing things or consuming things, and there's no empty space, you are really doing yourself a disservice, because that's the space is where your brain can do all this background work and put together ideas. And you're probably more brilliant than you realize simply because you've crowded out the space with screens.
There's a book I referenced on this show, I think a few months ago, that I was reading with my son, called Learning How to Learn. And they talk specifically about the importance of what she calls diffuse mode, and being able to take all these ideas we have. It's a passive thing you have to do, is to like you have these ideas in the shower, while you're walking, while you're running, just that they sit in the background. If you don't give your brain any time to do that, you just won't have those thoughts. That's like straight up science, everybody. It's science.
Our third boundary is activity. So we've kind of referenced some of these, but maybe you want or need to have your phone on hand, but you want to limit particular activities. So you can try focus mode on the iPhone. I am going to guess that Android has that option, and I'm not sure anyone on this podcast is going to be able to answer that.
We're not willing to do a Google search before we record this podcast. That's how disinterested we are in the Android platform. Sorry, I know. I have some hardcore Android users in my coaching group, and if they're listening to this, they're shaking their head at me.
I know.
John and Sarah, you know who you are. No sympathy.
Apparently, there is something on Android. It is called focus mode. So there you go.
Wow, crazy. Okay,
$10. $10 says Apple stole it from Android, but claims that it was the first innovator.
It probably was
for sure,
100%. So the idea here is to write out your commitment. Things like, I will not text or check email during meetings, or going back to our last boundary, it might be something like, I will not listen to a podcast on my way to work, just to have that space where you're not having any input. Your brain is just able to wander. I will not check my work email outside of the workday. I talked about this recently on the podcast, and then had several people in the Full Focus Planner community message me about this, but I do not have an email app on my phone. I've deleted that. And so the only way for me to check my email on my phone is to go into Safari, log into my email. I've made it very difficult. So, but commitments like this are really helpful to kind of put a boundary around the activity.
Yeah. This one last tip here, if you're struggling with using your phone a lot, at times you don't want to be using it, this is where rituals can be helpful. I recently revamped my morning and my workday startup ritual. New quarter, let's take a look at these things. And whenever I do that, I input them into an app on my phone. Now I know this is still technically I'm using my phone, but hear me out. Because I'm using that and I have these new activities, I recognize that, I looked up and was like, I've been awake for 3.5 hours and I haven't gone on social media or checked my email or done anything, but I haven't had to resist that either. It's taken no willpower because I've filled that space with intentional activities that lend themselves to not using my phone. And so that's a way to use activity as well as a boundary, is to say, okay, great. I have a ritual. It's an evening ritual. It's a workday startup ritual. It's a time where I can do focused work, and that will require less willpower from you to just say, no Instagram, don't come at me. You don't have to exercise that muscle, and it'll be easier for you.
So today's tip to level up your focus is to just look at how much time you're using your phone and experiment with it. Take one of these boundaries around technology and try it out. It's an experiment, and see what it does to your focus and productivity.
Thanks for joining us on Focus on This.
This is the most productive podcast on the internet, so share it with your friends, and don't forget to join our Full Focus Planner community on Facebook. We'll be back next Monday with another great episode. Until then, stay focused.
Stay focused.
The snaps are back, everybody.
Snaps.
Watch out.